To reflect on the feast of St. Augustine this year, I want to start by using a quote from a different saint. A quote from St. Thomas the Apostle. A familiar quote to all of us because Thomas is best known for saying this: "Unless I see, I will not believe." And so we have doubting Thomas, unable to accept that there's anything beyond his human perception. Jesus, of course, will respond to that statement, saying, "Blessed are those who believe without seeing." So I think this is a good place to start because we have the connection between Thomas and Augustine, and a connection between Jesus and St. Monica. Because Monica believed, simply because she accepted and felt the presence of God in her heart. She believed in her faith in general, and she believed in the power of God to bring about the conversion of her son, even when it seemed after decades that it would not happen. Augustine struggled to get to that point of believing because he couldn't see past what he presumed to be the most important quality that he had: his own intellect, his own ability to see and understand. The conversion of Augustine was held back because he thought the same thing as Thomas the Apostle: "Unless I see, I will not believe." Now, I bring this up not only because it is part of the story of Augustine, but as we honor Augustine, we need to learn from him. And I think that this same attitude is one that causes a great difficulty for many of us in our own conversion. We too stand on that ground of saying, "Unless I see, I cannot believe." It's very strong in us to have this notion that seeing is believing, when in fact, more often, the opposite is really true. Only when we begin to believe do we actually begin to see. So think about seeing and how much stock we put in what is right in front of us, what we are convinced of because we observe it. But then think about how many ways that our eyes can be tricked. As children, we are drawn to optical illusions, where we look at various images, where it seems that they have to be a certain way, only to look at them from a different angle and discover it's quite the opposite. Our eyes are not as reliable as we want them to be. We all have experiences of struggling to see because of shadows and darkness, thinking that something is a certain way only to have the light shine on it and see that we were entirely wrong. Now, the much deeper difficulty in our ability to see is what happens within us, the ways that our eyes are tricked because of prejudice that is within us, because of presumption within us about the way things are, about a way a person is, because, well, we know them. And we fail to see the truth of what is going on. At times, there are tricks of the eye because of our lack of faith, like Thomas, like Augustine. What we need is that acceptance, that belief that because God is God, that there is more than meets the eye. That we can step in faith into the plan of God, because after all, the God we believe in is the source of everything, being itself, creation itself. Now I want to share with you a quote from St. Augustine as he wrestled with this. This is a quote from when he began to search for God and when he began to perceive why he was having trouble discovering God. This is what Augustine said: "And where was I when I was looking for you? You were certainly in front of me, but I had turned away from myself. I couldn't find myself. How much less could I find you?" Augustine began to accept the fact that there was more than meets the eye. He began to recognize that many things that he had presumed were actually keeping him away from God. And in this case, he felt himself torn within his own soul and unable to see the truth of God, even when he desired it. Many of our struggles come from the same problem. We misunderstand at times our own deepest identity. And because of that, it distorts everything around us. Augustine would also say, my inner self was a house divided against itself. We are precious as part of God's creation. And God moves powerfully in the lives of each one of us. And so when we begin to bring all of our lives into the life of God, when we begin to live in His mercy, then we discover God in the only complete way that we can. Because we believe in a God of all creation, and yet this God comes to us in the most personal reality. He desires the intimate relationship with Him, which means we can only discover God in our own lives when we see ourselves in light of this intimate relationship. Now, the path forward, the ability to see beyond what our eyes and senses can tell us, this path forward starts with a choice. It's not simply a matter of, well, it happens for some and it doesn't for others. Some people have faith like Monica, other people struggle. It's not as simple as that. Yes, it can be easier for some, and yet for each, it starts with a choice. A choice to look at every reality, starting within our own lives and looking out around us to say, what am I looking for? When we are like Thomas and say, if I can't see it, I don't believe it, well, that's a choice that we make. But when we can say, Lord, I don't understand, but I trust that you are there, that's a choice that we make. And that choice about how we're going to take in the information in front of us is going to have a lot to do with whether we come to belief in God or not. Do we find ourselves at odds with our very identity, the identity that is first above all, that we are sons and daughters of God? It takes an act of humility to accept that there is more than meets the eye. But we can only begin to truly see God when God reveals what is hidden. Only when we are able to look past the pride that says, I know best, are we able to perceive what is truly best, what God has in store for us. A word that I think is crucial to understand in our day and age is the word transcendent. The word transcendent is a word that points to there being something greater, something that transcends what the eyes can see, something that transcends what is in front of me. This is a reality that starts to tap us into God. The transcendent is the realm of God, and it is only in the realm of God that we can discover what is real. And so we should look for what is beyond, what is greater, what is bigger than what the senses can perceive. Now, we have experiences of this because this idea of the transcendent, of the greater reality of God, this is what moves our hearts. And so every time we feel the tug of our heart because of love, because we perceive beauty and goodness, because of this, we can come into contact with God. And so again, it's a choice about where do I place my trust. A choice about will I respond to this situation with the humility that says there is more than meets the eye. God has made our hearts to desire more. And when we decide to seek God first, then everything else comes into clearer focus. Through the lens of God, We can see evil for what it is, and it begins to lose its power over us. When we look through the lens of God, we begin to see love for what it is, and we are lifted up, allowing us to be more forgiving of the faults of others, allowing us to look at the realities of this human world and see the limitations of what politics and social realities offer to us, to see that these are reflections of what we are made for, that we strive for the transcendent, that we look at our society, at other people, at our own lives in light of what more is there, where is God, and in that perception, we begin to discover what is real. Augustine said that the first real change toward conversion in his life happened within him when he heard a voice say, "Take and read." And he picked up the Bible and read it with new eyes. Instead of reading it with all of the ways he thought he understood it, he opened his heart to let God reveal. He approached it with a humility that said, "I don't understand it all," asking God to help him see. And when he picked up the gospel and began to read with humility, he discovered what had been hidden from him. And so he began to live in what was real. And as he began to believe, he began to see. So we gather today to mark this feast. And as we do so in this day and age, we recognize that our lives are complex, that there are many situations and issues around us that are confusing. But acknowledging the complexity of our lives is also an opportunity to step into that complexity with either pride or humility. And when we look directly at the challenges of our lives, accepting the complexity for all they are, then we can begin to realize they are so complex that only the God of all creation can make sense of it. And when we look at it through that lens, then things to make sense to us. And so to celebrate the feast of our patron, the best thing that we can do is not only remember his story, not only celebrate the heritage that comes to us because of this place, but that we imitate his path to conversion, that we imitate him in making that act of humility that says there is more than meets the eye, and then begin to look at our lives and the world around us in light of God. And only then can we, with Augustine, look at the world as did his mother, as did Jesus, saying, "Blessed are those who believe," because only then can we begin to see.